So I guess what we're going to do, I'm going to just read from the first chapter of the book, assuming that most of you haven't seen it. Since we're talking about chasing a killer, I guess we should have a killer in the room. And then we're going to talk for a little bit. I think we got some questions for each other and sort of give the context for how we sort of came together. And then we'll do a Q&A, which is probably the best part anyway. So if you got questions to ask us, we'll, at least I'll try to answer everything. I don't know about Bob, but I guess I'm sort of open book. So just read the first chapter here, just to open up, and you'll get to see how weird I am. If you can't hear me, tell me, all right? So the very first chapter, and I'll give you the context in a second. This is called The Things That Keep You Safe. Electrical currents pulsed in the tip of each of his fingers. When he'd keyed open the trunk of the car 15 minutes earlier to find the gloves and the X-Acto knife, the spark had leapt off the keyhole. Now the wind was up, just as the man on the radio had said, ripping leaves from the eucalyptus trees and scattering them into the playground. There beneath the bruised, late evening sky, a couple swayed on a swing, the teenage girl draped across her boyfriend's lap. He leaned against a tree trunk for a moment and watched them, their tangled bodies swaying in the half circle, her small hand pressed against the boy's cheek, her kisses wide mouthed and devouring. He peeled strips of bark from the trees until the green skin was exposed to the desert air. The two kids were aware of nothing except each other's body, not the wind, not the deepening darkness, not the screech of the swinging S-hook, not the man standing 15 yards away in the night shadow of the swaying eucalyptus trees. The street lamps flickered to life, and suddenly the dark path of the green belt was illuminated, a cement walkway snaking the grass behind fenced backyards. The girl glanced up at the light, but her mind was focused on the boy, on the inner storm heating her body. She might have felt him there. He wasn't sure. People felt things. He'd learned that in the last few months. The heat of his eyes on the back of their necks, his electric body radiating beneath the windowsills, the hint of his footsteps on the patio steps. It excited him, his presence pricking their awareness. He stood still in the darkness just as he did now, watching their momentary pause as though hearing some primal echo of people once hunted. The girl blinked blindly and then slid down her boyfriend's thighs, her hand moving toward his belt. He could see what her hand was doing, and a memory gripped him, a door thrown open to bursting light, fingers like giant spider legs prickling his skin, his childhood name whispered among the earwigs and beetle bugs and white curly-Q worms of the basement. And his childhood voice spoke something, not in his head, not in his memory, but out loud into the present world. "Who's there?" the girl said. And he was jolted back to himself. Dusk, Santa Ana winds, green belt running through the center of a housing tract. "Who the hell's there?" the boy spoke now, his voice pitched low to hide his sudden fear. He liked the boy, liked his fear. Awake to himself, he spun around the tree trunk and walked behind the grove of eucalyptus. "Creeper," he heard the girl say. "We're in a goddamn movie," the boy yelled after him. His head throbbed now, the electricity buzzed in his teeth. He could feel his left eye fluttering and closing, his mind spinning in a vertigo until his adult self chastised his childhood self and everything found its place again in the world. The lights illuminating the path were like bright white moons stabbed into the ground. He was drawn into the warm pools of light and then into the cool darkness and back into light until he found himself in the half darkness of a flickering bulb. He stood for a moment beneath the staccato filament until finally it sparked and popped. Another light caught his attention then. Beyond the pathway was a window. It glowed orange in the night and cast its mirror image on the mowed lawn beneath it. In the window stood a woman, her head enveloped in steam, her features smudged as though an eraser had been rubbed across her face. He watched the woman now from the green belt, music from her stereo floating in the hot evening, some sort of jazz, his fingers tingling with the beat. She was alone. He could feel it. There was an opening in her fence, no locked gate, just a garden of stunted cactus twisting out of white rock. He didn't always know what he was looking for. Sometimes he just went for walks in the neighborhoods, watching the boys in the street popping ollies on their skateboards, sniffing the dampness of pesticides sprayed in the grass, peering into windows where women slipped blouses over their heads. These neighborhoods with their privacy fences and dwarf palms, their greenbelt walks and rows of eucalyptus. Here, in these neighborhoods, people left garage doors open, left backyard sliding glass doors unhinged. They slept with their windows cracked, the ocean breeze on their necks in the early morning. He might go 3 or 4 nights without the feeling, maybe a week, but tonight, standing in the pool of darkness beneath a shorted out bulb, he felt it, and he stepped over the cactus spines into her backyard. He came up along the side of the house. There she was, bent over a cutting board, slicing tomatoes, cooking pasta. The window beaded with steam, turning the glass into a mirror, and for a moment he could see half his face. He caught only glimpses of it in the last few months, a shard of it in the rearview mirror, a cheek and an eye in the side view, a nose and a forehead while bent over a sink, scouring his hands. His face was soft and boyish, and he was forced to look at it now, that baby face, until the woman slicked her hand across the pane and glanced at the window. He froze and stared back at her, feeling the charged current pass beneath him. If she saw him, he would run, but if he didn't. It was dark outside her window, and he knew it was a mirror for her, too. When she tried to look through the glass, all she saw were her own eyes staring back, as though what had frightened her was imagined. No, he said to himself, what you're afraid of is real. And she turned to the sink and washed the bowl, her back to him, her shoulders sloped, her flowery house dress tangled around her waist. The music blared into the kitchen, trumps, bass, drums rat-a-tat-tatting a beat, notes plinking through the screen window like pieces of candied metal. When she was finished, she sat on a stool, facing the boiling pasta, and sipped a glass of wine. There was no ring on her finger, no one coming home to her tonight. He liked her loneliness. Her aloneness would make things easier. People who had someone he had discovered thought harder. He found the sliding glass door, the glass was pulled back, the house opened to the hot wind. Just a screen separated him from the carpeted living room. He tugged on the handle, locked. He felt his blood rush then, a brief fluttering of his left eye. The door to the basement had a lock on it, an iron hinge clamped shut from the outside. When the door closed, he was his childhood self. He had been like a bird with a hood put over his eyes, blinking in the darkness of his own brain, till the voice in his head strung made-up syllables together, and a space opened in his mind where the voice lived, and the voice kept him from being afraid. Locked. The screen was locked. He watched the woman in the kitchen, her back bowed with heavy shoulders, the steam swirling above her head, the music, a chaos of metal clinks. It's just aluminum and metal, he wanted to say, mesh and aluminum. The stupid things that make you feel safe, doors and walls, screens and lights. He put on the gloves first, like slipping into new skin, and slit a line along the aluminum frame with the X-Acto knife, the plinking of each thread drowned by the squeal of trumpets. When it was cut, he peeled back the screen, and the mesh yawned open to let him inside. So, sorry. So I was writing, thank you. I wrote this scene in the morning before going down to make my daughter lunch for school and then taking her to the bus station. That was a little strange moment, but just a little context. As Adele mentioned, this story is really sort of inspired. I don't know if that's the right word, but inspired by two things: the Golden State Killer, who, if you've been paying attention to the news, was apparently just caught yesterday after like 30 years of being on the run. Thank God for DNA evidence. And I can talk a little bit about him more later on, but really it was inspired by the Night Stalker. In 1985, if you don't know, and Bob's going to talk more about this in a second, the Night Stalker was sort of terrorizing Southern California. He would drive the LA freeways and pull off in suburban neighborhoods and climb through open windows, just as I described here, or walk through open doors and kill people in their own homes. And I was 15 at the time, living in Irvine, which is about 38 miles south of LA. I mean, some of you might know it. At the time, it wasn't all built up like it is now. It was surrounded by olive groves and strawberry fields and orange groves, and was really sort of felt separate from the rest of LA. And we had this sort of idea we were safe down there, that nothing could touch us down there. And it was a place where everybody left their doors open at night and their windows open, their doors unlocked and the windows open at night. And one night he drove one of the freeways, maybe you know more about this in a second, and struck and hit a house in Mission Viejo, which is just south of the next town over, south of Irvine, and suddenly the whole illusion that we were safe and separate from the rest of the world sort of collapsed. And when my father coming home, 82nd Airborne, from work one day, and he pulled out a bunch of rods, like what are those things where you sweep? Brooms, thank you. Broom handles. Get a little nervous and the brain stops. Pulled out these broom handles out of the trunk of his car, and he went into the garage, didn't say anything to me because he was one of those stoic guys, and started sawing the broomsticks into smaller lengths and started wedging them into the window wells and the sliding glass door wells, and realized he was scared. And once he was scared, I was terrified. And it was the first time I remember feeling like somebody could just take me, that I wasn't safe anymore. And I remember lying in bed at night, listening to having Johnny Carson on television so I could go to sleep at night. All our windows closed. We didn't have air conditioning at the time. It was ridiculously hot. And it was terrifying. And for years I wanted to write about that experience, that sense of fear, that sense of like that something can just come and grab you and take you away. And the first time I'd ever felt that was then. But I was just a scared 15-year-old, and this guy was out chasing him. So, I mean, I just want to know what that was like. You know, we talked a little bit about it, but not enough. I want to know more. What was it like chasing this guy? How was it different from like other crimes or other people you chase?
First off, how many people know much about the Night Stalker?
Yeah, you're Californian over there.
Well, one day if you're bored or something, Wikipedia, do a Wikipedia search on the Night Stalker, okay? It's, the difference in this one is homicide investigations, and I worked in South Central Los Angeles, my homicide time. I worked in a small division, famous down there, called 77th Street Division. It was during the crack epidemic, and so it was really violent time. It's a small area, we had 14 homicide detectives, seven teams. In 1987, that little small division had 160 murders. It was a killing field. We handled 25, 30 as a team. You never got any rest. You're always tired. You're getting called out all the time. It's just the way it was. But this was different because, and I'm going to give you a little background on it so you understand why this was different. Those murders are drive-by murders, arguments, knifings, mostly gangs. You know, husband, wife, common law, get in an argument, shoot somebody or something like that. The gang shootings are real difficult because there are no witnesses. Nobody wants to talk. They may end up dead. Those are really hard to solve. I mean, you have to do it, and you put your heart and soul into it. But this was different. I'm going to tell you why this was different. His first murder happened in August of 1984. They didn't know it till years later because they got a DNA hit. We didn't have DNA at the time. So when he started his murder spree, and I'll use the name the Night Stalker, not his real name, I'll get into that later. I was working Metropolitan Division. That's a specialized unit. We work both uniform and plain clothes. Wherever the problems are in the city, they would send Metro out. We worked, like if there were, for example, if there was a takeover robbery team, and they'd done a lot of bank robberies. So they would put us in banks with suits and ties, and we'd be sitting behind a desk like a mid-level manager with a shotgun between our legs and the gun in the garbage can. You know, that you got to get action fast. That's what Metro does. So anyway, after about, I didn't know this we didn't know it at the time. We didn't know we had a serial killer. Robbery homicide is the specialized, that they handle the big cases in LA, like the O.J. Simpson case. Most people know about that. That would go to robbery homicide division. And so they took 10 of us Metro cops and a sergeant and brought us up to robbery homicide division, and they said, hey, you're going to work a specialized task force. We got a serial killer. That's all we knew. We go up there on the first day, I'll never forget this, the senior detective, Leroy Orozco, and he's going to brief us on this serial killer. And I think about this time there, he was good for about 8 or 9. So he's given us the information, and it's very scant. The only real lead they had was he wore very unique sneakers. I think it's pronounced Avia, A-V-I-A.
A-V-I-A, yeah.
And at one of the crime scenes, they had a footprint. But the other interesting thing was, he said, we think he's mocking us, the police, because on one of the victims, one of the murders, he drew what he said was a sheriff star on her thigh and a sheriff star on the walls. Well, it wasn't a sheriff star. We didn't know this at the time. It was a pentagram, which is the sign of the devil. So the next thing about the Night Stalker that differed was the savagery of his crimes. Now, I'm going to basically use the definitions that, people get arrested for, because I don't want to go into the detail. So when I say sexual assault, I don't want to tell you what these sexual assaults are. I will tell you, when I say savagery, beating, machetes, shooting at close range, stabbings, kicking, mutilating the bodies. Now, the one thing I will tell you, and there's a reason I'm going to say this, it's not frightening or anything like that. On one of the victims, he cut out their eyeballs, okay? And there's a reason he did that, but we didn't know it at the time. So now you got this, you find out it's a pentagram. And then, the savage crimes and all this stuff. And then the cutting out of the eyeballs on one of them. He takes them. Took the eyeballs.
I didn't know this.
Yeah. So then we find out that some of the victims that lived, he would tell them, I want all the jewelry and this and that, or I'll kill you. And he would make them swear to Satan that I gave you everything. You swear to, people would say, if someone's going to kill you, I swear to God, I gave you everything, No, you got to swear to Satan. So now we realize this is satanic worship, devil worship. So the other thing that Alan really does a great job in his book about, which unless you've lived in Southern California, you won't understand this, the Santa Ana winds. It's a condition that usually happens in the late summer and into the fall, where the winds, these are hot winds that blow out of the desert. And it causes a situation, it's almost like a pressure cooker. And they blow for days, and they're hot, they're dry.
They're super dry.
Yeah, and what happens when the Santa Ana's blowing, you're a cop, and you find out, like you find a roll call, and they say, oh, the Santa Ana's blowing, you go, we're gonna be busy tonight. Violent crimes just go up. Well, during this time period, they were blowing all the time. And so the idea you'll get about the Santa Ana winds is, when you read about fire season in California? Okay, so when you hear fire season and the fires are going, those are the Santa Anas. So who does, when you hear about the fires, those are arsonists. What triggers them? The Santa Anas, this condition. People just go crazy. So arsonists come out, psychos go out. Alan does a great job of describing the Santa Ana winds throughout his book. One of the things he calls it is a dry hurricane, but it goes for days.
There's a couple famous quotes over there in the Word document. I guess could have done something fancier than that. From the first of it from Raymond Chandler, from Red Wind, and then Joan Didion talking about it. So if you have a chance to look at those, it'll give you a little sense of the Santa Ana winds and how it causes this sort of this energy and this edge in your body that, and people just kind of lose their minds. It's kind of wild. So sorry.
No, that's fine. And the other interesting thing, what they call the Santa Ana winds, the devil winds. So I'm just laying the groundwork on this guy. Well, I'm a practicing Roman Catholic, and so when it comes up about all this tying into devil worship and satanic worship, I went to the lieutenant. I said, hey, Lieutenant, each archdiocese here has an exorcist. And there's one here in the Los Angeles diocese. I don't know who it is. I said, great. I want the guy. Bring him in. That's your job. Go get the exorcist. So I find out that the exorcist is out on vacation, but he's taking a break. But his number two, his assistant, was a young archdiocese priest who just happened to be in the Rampart division of the city of Los Angeles. So I got to be careful because this is a real hush-hush thing. No one knows outside the task force about there's a serial killer. It's not in the press or anything like that. So I call the priest up and I say, hey, Father, listen, we've got some things that we're involved with, it might hinge on the satanic worship. We wonder if you could mind coming over and just talking to us? We have a task force. Okay. A couple of detectives have this. So I bring them in, and now this task force, the old Parker Center, the old headquarters, there's 6 floors, but there's a mezzanine floor, and nobody goes on that floor. Well, that's where the task force was kind of hidden away. And so I bring the priest up, and as we go in this labyrinth to get to the mezzanine floor to get in there, as you turn the corner and get into the room, the old IBM printout sheets, because this is like 1985, big letter, Night Stalker Task Force. He turns to me and goes, I thought it was something like this. Okay, so now you've got 4 robbery homicide detectives, their lieutenant, and 11 of us Metro cops. And we are very used to dead bodies, murders, violent crime, and it's just part of your job. Whatever your job is, if you do it long enough, you get used to it. Well, that was ours. So nothing really is out of the ordinary, is going to get you upset or anything like that. He talked for an hour and a half. You couldn't hear a pin drop. He finished, he walked out of there, and we were like, what are we into here? Because he went into great detail, and he talked about the eyes. He stole the soul. That's what the emphasis was on the Night Stalker, cutting those eyes out.
Thank God none of us knew about this when it was happening.
Yeah, that's never been, what I just told you, that no one, it's never been in the press, or no one's ever written about it, or some of these things I'm going to tell you, that was one of them. So I think all of us felt that we were looking into sheer evil, and we're dealing with this. Now, I've been married probably less than a year, so I'd have to go home each night, and my wife would be alone. And again, you can't open. Now, I live in a little town, El Segundo, right next to LAX. It's a beach community. It's a real pretty little town. They call it Mayberry by the sea. But this guy was all over. I mean, you're talking all over LA County, and I'll get into it a little bit more. So nobody was safe, but people didn't know it at the time. I knew it. So I have to leave my wife, and that always was tough on me. So now we get to August of '85, and there's more murders, and then he goes up to San Francisco, breaks into a house, kills the husband, shoots the wife 3 times in the head, but she lives, only by the grace of God, and he draws a pentagram and writes Jack the Knife. So the then mayor of San Francisco was Dianne Feinstein. She comes out in a press conference and says, it's the Night Stalker, because now the name had been out there. It's the Night Stalker, the same one that's down in Los Angeles. And oh, by the way, the reason we know it is we have a via shoe prints. Well, we were furious because, I mean, she could have come out and said, we have a clue that links it. She comes out and says, he's got a via sneakers, footprint. What do you think Ramirez did? He went to the Golden Gate Bridge and throws the shoes off, right? Okay. So 6 days after that, now remember, here you got LA County. Most of the crimes were actually in the unincorporated area of the county, which would be handled by the LA County Sheriff's Department. And they had their own task force. Then we have the city of LA, which handles its own like us, and we had quite a few, but not nearly as many as the sheriffs. But and we were working together with them. But now, you gotta remember now, Ramirez, the Night Stalker, goes all the way up to San Francisco. That's like going from Philadelphia and killing somebody in Boston, the distance. And 6 days later, he steals a car in Chinatown, Los Angeles, drives down to Mission Viejo, which I think is about 70-something miles from Chinatown, and he breaks into a house, shoots a man 3 times in the head, and he lives, and then sexually assaults the girlfriend. And then he tells her, when he leaves, tell them the Night Stalker was here. Okay, so when that happened, and again, the Santa Anas are blowing, the whole state, I kid you not, the whole state was in a panic. There's nobody safe. no matter what your economic means, whether you're poor, you're rich, he didn't care. He just was out to kill people for safety. So the whole state is now in a panic, and people are calling up the task force, and you can, I mean, you can just hear the hysteria. I know it's my neighbor. Why is that? Well, he's got those crazy eyes. Oh, okay, yeah, we'll be right on that one. But that was, I mean, that's constantly. So now I'll tell you how that they got him. On the Mission Viejo case, he went to another house before he did that one, and a young boy heard him. And I guess he got frightened away, and the young boy got the license number of his stolen car. And then Ramirez dumped the car. He drove back to Los Angeles, dumped the car in the Wilshire area. They found the car, and he was meticulous about wiping down the crime scene so he wouldn't leave any fingerprints. But like most guys, they're stupid. They make a mistake. Well, he left the fingerprint on the rear view mirror. And it's the first, here's another thing that they never talked about. This was the first time they ever used a special fingerprinting method. It was super glue. You hear about super glue? Well, back then, this was a whole new technique. They would spray the whole car, whatever it was, and they would develop a print, and they came up with the print. And then at the same time, so you got the license plate number, and you find the print, and then there was an informant in Santa Barbara who was his fence. A fence is like if you have stolen property, you go to the guy, he gives you some money for it, and he sells it for whatever profit he can get. So the fence in Santa Barbara realized it was the Night Stalker, and what happened was, when they made that fingerprint, the sheriff and the chief of police, Darrell Gates, both decided that they were going to release the photograph. And we were against it because we figured if you release that photograph to the public, to the press, he sees it, he's going to flee, and he's going to go under, and it's going to be that much harder to find him. But they overruled the task force, and actually they were right, because they put it out there. So that's when the informant must have seen it and gave the information and said, hey, he's in Tucson, Arizona, and he's coming in from Tucson into LA Saturday morning. And so, or he didn't know the exact time, he just said he's coming back by bus. So LAPD has a specialized unit called the SIS, Special Investigative Service, I think it's called, just those initials. Look those up. If you do a Google search on LAPD SIS, very interesting unit. They only do, they're really bad people, like guys that have violent crimes and stuff like that, where you don't have enough to put a case on them, but you know they're doing it. But they would surveil them once we have them bedded down, know where they're staying. They would surveil them until they commit a crime, and when they're coming out, then they try to take, they take them down, and most of those would end up in shootings. And I never worked it. I could have worked it, but just luck with a draw. But it's a very, very difficult job, and they were very good at it. Well, anyway, they were in the bus station, and then the lieutenant had 4 of us Metro cops that were going to go in at 8 o'clock and replace them. So we got the information like at 6 p.m. SIS went in there. So they're on there from 6 p.m. till 8 a.m. the following morning. And then the 4 of us replace them. And as they leave, 20 minutes later, all of a sudden we get radio broadcast. The Night Stalker has been seen at this liquor store like 6 blocks away from where we were. What happened was he came in on the bus, and those guys have been up long, tired, and everything like that. They missed him. So he came out of the bus station, and he didn't know he was wanted, and he goes down to a liquor store. I think it was at 6th and Main in Skid Row, and he hears these women speaking Spanish, like, I can't remember the word Night Stalker, but they were saying, and he's Richard Ramirez, he spoke Spanish. He hears Night Stalker, then he looks on where the newspapers are, La Opinion, the Spanish paper, there's this picture, like right on the front page. So he takes this one, and that's when the broadcasts come in, hey, Night Stalker, seen here, seen here. So he runs across the 4th Street, he hijacked the car, gets over into the Hollenbeck section of LA, and then he ditches that car. People are running after him now. And he runs up to a car where a pregnant woman comes out of her house and is getting into the car. He grabs her, pulls her out of the car, and she's wrestling with it and screaming. Her husband and son come out, grab a pipe, and just start dyno tuning them. The neighborhood comes over, and they're basically putting the boots to them. And finally the cops roll up and get them, otherwise they would have killed them. So they then take them to the Hollenbeck police station, and a crowd gathers, and they're very respectful, but they want to lynch them. They want to go inside the police station and shoot them up, but we wouldn't let them do it. But
Very respectful.
Yeah, right, so they got the Night Stalker, and so they filed numerous charges on him, and then the last thing, almost like the epilogue, which is, again, why this is sort of a unique case, he goes to trial. The first week of the trial, one of the jurors is murdered. And when it just said jurors murdered, everybody figured, because this guy was like a ghost. But it turned out, that was the initial thing, she was murdered, but it was her boyfriend that did it, and got him. But, so that's basically the difference between the Night Stalker and your quote-unquote regular murder, and why it was so unique.
Well, that's what was so terrifying about it, because it was that it was the randomness of it.
Right.
You know, just anybody in the LA metro area, there's freeways everywhere. It was like, you know, we hit houses a quarter mile away from the freeway. In anybody's house, could be my house, and they're mostly single story homes at the time. A lot of people didn't have air conditioning, and you know, in my house, you could walk on the side and sort of push in the window, even if it was locked, and unlock it. So it was just so terrifying this idea this guy could just get anybody. You couldn't think, oh, he's going for these kinds of people, or he's staying in this kind of neighborhood. It was just that it was everybody and everywhere, you know. So, I mean, I guess I want to ask you, I was thinking about this, you know, you raised a couple kids, you have a wife, and I guess I don't want to get too personal, but if I am, just tell me. But I mean, one thing I want to do in this book, and in this book there are two other, I go from the point of view of the serial killer, but the two main characters, one is Natasha Betancourt, who was one of the first female medical examiners in LA area, and then Benjamin Wade, who is the detective, who is a small town detective, used to be in LA, has gone down to Rancho Santa Elena. I was hesitant about writing about a serial killer. Like, I wanted to at first write about the kind of fear that is sort of instilled in this place, and sort of how to change the character of the place I grew up in. There's another crime, and that Ben has to investigate, but I really wanted to try to capture, first off, that Ben's a man first, a person first, and a detective second. And that Ben's got his own problems, and sometimes they're exacerbated by what the detective work he has to do. But I was like constantly trying to think about what it would be like being a homicide detective, especially when you're trying to chase somebody like Night Stalker, and then going home, you know, and going home to your wife and going up to your kids, and how do you, constantly trying to capture, like, how do you make that shift, or do you make that shift? How did you negotiate that as a detective?
There's some of my friends here that Philadelphia PD, and there's a Lowell Marion detective here. They could probably answer just as well as I could. I don't know if you actually really do. Sometimes, I know I spoke with Alan, and I said, you know, you're always thinking about it in the back of your mind. You wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, you go, okay, what about this person?
Oh yeah, Rogers did that too.
Yeah, and he said the same thing. So, I mean, you do the best you can. You try to disassociate yourself when you go home. My town, El Segundo, that was my sanctuary. It's a beautiful, beautiful little town, like I said, very by the sea, and it's right by the ocean. I didn't surf then. I didn't take surfing up until I was 50. I wish I would have done it a lot earlier. But it still is that's my sanctuary there. And of course, I had the best wife in the world. And very supportive of me, because you know, I'm never home. When you get called out all the time, you have to have an understanding wife. So you do the best you can. I think you stay grounded. God bless the Dominican nuns that taught me in grammar school and gave me my faith. I also think that having a sense of humor is really important, because you gotta stay loose, and you know, you can't let all this stuff get to you. I know my buddies will tell you this stuff. I don't drink. I never have drank, and I was probably the first what do you call that, the driver, you know, at parties and stuff.
Designated driver.
Designated driver, Villanova, when he even had one. So I never developed that, because a lot of policemen, you know, that gets to be a problem. And I always stayed in shape, always worked out every day, and I think that's real important. So those are the kind of things that I try to do, and I guess my wife would be the best one to ask. I know I failed sometimes, but you do the best you can, and you just get through it.
You do as a writer too. Just try to get through it. There's a question I want to ask, and I'm forgetting it now. Oh, go back. So there's a little teaser, but this is sort of going back. It gets through the book a little bit. But so Bob had emailed me, and as I said, I let the email sit for 2 days. I was terrified. She was going to tell me all the ways I got things wrong in the book. I really was. I just kind of told my wife, I told Mimi, I'm like, I can't read this email. She's like, you got to read the email. I'm like, no, I don't have to read the email. There's a damn thing, you know. I don't want to find out why I get everything wrong. She's like, no, you got just go read the email. It'll be fine. And I did. I think I was sweating bullets, to use a cliche, and it was. And you were very complimentary. I was very happy to find out. I was very shocked that that was the case. But you said you really just brought up a lot of memories for you, as it did for me. So we were talking about, I think we were talking the other night about like, I guess sort of thing is like talking the intersection of detective fiction and being a detective. And it struck me when I was writing the book is I didn't really know what I was doing. I don't know any detectives until now. I know now I do. I didn't know any detectives. I hadn't hung out with any detectives or any cops. I've been arrested once, but I won't tell you about that. And you know, I just sort of dove in, and somebody here in town offered to get me to go driving on a drive with detectives in Philly, and I almost did it. I was going to go do it, and I was like about 30 or 40 pages in the book already, and I sort of agreed to do it, and I decided not to because I thought it would give me too much information. I was sort of scared about it. We were talking about though that. One of the things I was thinking about when I was writing the book, and I do research when I had to, but that something like police detective work is, seems to me like you have to build a narrative, right? Using what you have, and build a narrative, put a story together to figure out what's happened, what's going on, you know. And it struck me that like that's what you do, obviously, when you're writing a book, you know. So can you talk about that a bit, like with?
Yeah. Well, first off, I got to tell you why I contacted him. I love reading the mystery crime novels, not the real stuff. The reason I do is they solve all their cases. We don't. They always get their bit, as they say. So, and I like it, and that's also one of the things that helps me, you know, just relax and read. So, I read a Wall Street Journal review of this book, Shadow Man, and they wrote it up like the best thing since sliced bread.
I was very happy that day.
Yeah. So I got the book, and like Adele said, I just went right through it. You know, I probably read it in a day or two at the most. And I told my wife, this guy really nailed it. He knows not only about the similarities of the Night Stalker, but how detectives think and how they work. I said, I don't know who his source was, because most writers, like there's famous writers like Michael Connelly and James Ellroy, I know the guys who are their sources on LAPD. And so I figured, I don't know who his guy was, but it might have been somebody on the task force that I knew. So then when I contacted him, and he says, oh no, I didn't have a source, I got it on the internet. I'm like, but he really does.
Talk about feeling like a fraud.
No. I'm going to tell you some things of why he was so good at this. This is why you should read this book. First off, early on, the most important tool that a detective has is his notebook, his pad. Every time you watch TV and movies, you never see the guy writing notes down. That's all we do. We write copious notes, everything we do, and we keep those notes. And we're very anal, to the point where, like, we didn't have computers in those days. So if we would get a phone message, call Willie at this phone number, Well, whether we called them or not, whatever, we would keep that, I kept every note, my partner and I, in our blue book. It's called the murder book. And we stick them in there. 6 months, a year from now, you go, God, that Willie, that was a key guy, whether he's a suspect or a witness or something like that. What was that phone number? Or didn't you write it down there or whatever? And then you look and you find it. So we write everything we do, you keep a lot. In LA, we called it the murder book. And if you see LAPD detectives, they got this light blue binder. That's called the murder book. You keep everything you do in it. He nails that. Like for the crime scene, he says the detective comes to the scene and the officer writes down in the crime log what time he arrived. Everybody that's at a crime scene, you put down the time that they were there and the time that they left. It's called a crime log. Because sometime later, 6 months, a year later, 2 years later in court, you're going to have to produce that for witnesses and things. What he really nailed is how a detective views the crime scene. Most people view the crime scene from here to the front. Detectives do that, but they also look back from the crime scene outward to try, because you got to get inside the criminal's mind, whether it's robbery, burglary, murder, it doesn't matter. All crimes are the same. Some are more famous or more elaborate, but they're all the same. So your job is to get inside, why did he pick that house? Why did he pick that time? And what he captures in it, and he really gets it, is because this protagonist, Ben Wade, goes to all these different crime scenes and sees the similarities and notices things, he's able to pick up key clues, and that's how you solve cases. So that's another thing.
That's what I was trying to figure it out too, because I didn't know what I was doing. I got to figure out what's the evidence here.
He also goes in the book about autopsies. And autopsies are shockingly degrading. I mean, the first time you see how they can't just not only handle that human body, but what was a live body, now it's quote unquote a piece of evidence, and what they have to do to extract evidence or check things out. It's really brutal. It really is. And
it's brutal on the internet too, when you watch videos of them.
Please don't do that. You don't need to do it. It's very degrading, and when you do this for a living and you see this constantly, I know I've told my wife, unless I'm the victim of a violent crime and killed, I don't care what the reason is, you do not let them, what we call post. Don't let them post me. Don't let them do an autopsy. And I'm sure the detectives here who have seen autopsy will tell the same thing. I don't want them to do that to me. They have to if it's a crime. Other than that, I don't care. He mentions about up close crimes, strangulation, knifings. It's one thing to shoot somebody from a distance. It's another thing to take somebody's life up close and literally to see the life go out of them. And he gets that. He also gets the idea of crime scenes and how big city departments who handle a number of them differ than small suburbans where they don't have many murders, and then suddenly they have one, and how sometimes a crime scene isn't handled properly. The other thing I like about him is good detectives do pin maps, and his guy starts charting the crimes. And again, he's getting inside the suspect's head to the point where he knows where he's at or where he's going to hit, things like that. And that's how detectives solve crime. TV and movies, you get it like, oh, these guys are brilliant or something like that. No, we're very anal. And I used to tell young detectives that, okay, so when you got to go out to a crime scene, like a murder, you got to door knock in the neighborhood. And one time we door knocked the neighborhood, this is a funny story, but it's true. We door knocked the neighborhood 3 times in 6 weeks for a violent gang where they beat a guy to death in the middle of the street and nobody saw anything, right? 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So we hit it 3 times, 2 weeks apart, 6 weeks. And the 3rd time we went to one of the houses. We'd been there 2 times before. Elderly couple. The woman had dementia, and the husband was blind. I don't know, Billy Cox, my homicide partner, God bless him, he's the best in the world. He goes, Bob, why are we going to do this one again? I said, Billy, come on, we got to go through the numbers. If you go to 49 doors, you got to go to the 50th. Knock on the door. the woman opens up, "Hi, detectives, can we talk to you for a second?" We walk in. I see a woman down a long hallway. She's sitting in the kitchen. She's about 35 years old. She looks at me and she goes like this, just like this. She looks up my direction and she puts her head down. I walk up to her. I have no reason why I asked it. It's God, divine intervention. First thing I said to her is, "You saw it, didn't you?" She goes like this. I'm standing here, and she waited about 30 seconds, because I know it went through her mind, thinking, if I tell this detective, I may be dead, my family, etc. And then she looked up, she said, "Yeah, I saw it." And then, okay, we went from there, we solved the case. But that's how detective work is. It's very plotting, it's very boring, it's...
Right, we were talking about this too, that's the trick of writing a book, because it is, like you said, anal, meticulous work, right? But the book's got to move. It's got to, the narrative's got to move. So it was really, I would get in the weeds with stuff and like reading all these things about how detectives work, and that's really interesting. I'm gonna put all this in, and the book just gets like this. So the trick in writing the book was to figure out like, okay, what absolutely needs to be found in this scene, like what has to be dealt with. So it's really a trick, because like diving into this stuff is fascinating, but the narrative has to keep moving. So I just realized that when I write the narrative, I think what had to happen in the story, and then when I get stuck, and I don't know how this happens, then I would like read for 3 days, until I figured out what I could use, but like that would work, But it's really divine intervention, actually, for me, that it actually seems like I'm doing that.
I'm shocked that he put this together the way he did. Because like I said, I told my wife, I said, this guy, I don't know what it is, but he knows how detectives work, he knows how they think. And then he tied it in, it's almost like he knows the Night Stalker. Because he really tied that in with the Santa Anas and just the way the guy thought. He really nails it.
Thanks. Thank you. How are we on time? Where are we? But how long have we been going? I mean, when we started.
It's 8:15 now.
Okay. We started, what, 8:40, something like that? 7:40? All right. Can I ask one more question? And if you guys have any questions, you can ask us some questions. I was thinking about this today, and we were talking last night, and you had said that you were surprised that nobody had written a book about the Night Stalker, like a fictional account of it, and then you were thankful that they hadn't, because you were afraid it would have caused copycat murders or something. But serial killers are a big part of popular culture. Like, Americans seem to love reading about serial killers, and obviously I've got one in my book. So I'm just wondering, like, from a detective standpoint, who actually dealt with hunting down those serial killers, like, how do you feel about that? Does it bother you? Is it like?
I told Alan this. I used to tell my wife, God, I don't know why somebody didn't do a good movie or write a really good book on the Night Stalker, because there's so much stuff in there. It's really interesting to grab on to people. But that was when I was younger. Now that I'm older, I even told her just recently, I said, I'm glad nobody did that. The reason being is, I believe, and I think the detectives that are out here, the police officers, they'll back me up on this. Lots of people have latent quirks that never come out in their life. But if they're hit with a certain stimulus, they'll do things that are just terrible things, outrageous things. And so the Santa Ana winds can do that. Something that can trigger them from TV or a movie can do that. Well, I strongly believe, like these school shootings. You got these people out there that are basic losers in life's lottery, and they're castaways and cast-asides. They have no life, no future, no nothing. And hey, wow, this guy's famous because he just shot 15 people. Wow, I can have my 15 minutes of fame, so I'm going to go get an AR-15 and shoot up a school. Well, I firmly believe that if somebody did a really blockbuster movie or a really blockbuster book, now he's got the mystery, but it's not really the Night Stalker. But if they did the reality thing, I would hate to think, and because again, the difference is the devil worship. I firmly believe that Ramirez was possessed. There's no doubt in my mind or anybody else's mind that man was possessed by the devil. And I'd be scared to death that would happen again. I wouldn't want that.
Questions?
In the book that you wrote, Sharon, was the Night Stalker the name of the...
No.
Did you use that name?
No, it's like the Night Prowler.
Okay.
You would never know, would you? No, it's not proud. My imaginative skills were not that hot on that one. But you know, the names that, because these are names that I don't think the detectives are coming up with, it's the media's coming up with. So there's always these sensational names. So, you know, and Ben even comments on it. He's really ticked off that they called it that, because it romanticizes in some ways, it sensationalizes it, makes it this sort of exciting thing, you know. And I think it sounds like Ramirez sort of latched onto that too a little bit. But yeah, the Night Prowler.
He was convicted.
Repeat the question.
Yeah. The question was, whatever happened to Ramirez? He was convicted on like 12 counts of murder and 11 of sexual assault and 14 or 15 burglaries. Got the death penalty, but because of California with so many appeals, this was back in, I think, 85, 86 when he got convicted and died in prison from natural causes. I
think it was
he had
lymphoma.
hepatitis, yeah,
Lymphoma,
cancer,
I think he was.
some other stuff in 2007.
He was 53.
Yeah.
In Truth in Advertising, I'm Bob's brother, but I was living in California, and I remember the night you came over when you said that you were talking to the priest. Can you describe what you felt and your emotions when you were literally faced with pure evil and someone who just did killing for the sake of killing?
Yeah, it was quite, it was a unique situation, like you were really facing darkness, you were facing Satan, and somebody that was possessed by Satan. There's no doubt in my mind he was. I don't think anybody who looked at him and read about his crime and what he did, it was, which is so different because I associate, if I was going to associate your normal run-of-the-mill criminal, they're basic people in Elmore Leonard's a great mystery writer, and he does great characters. Well, they're kind of like Elmore Leonard characters, you know, basic, you know, okay guys, I mean, you know, you talk to him, you interview him and stuff like that. Not a bad guy, and then he just shot and killed somebody. I mean, you know, I'm being lighthearted about it, but this guy was different, and because it was pure evil, which is totally different.
Spotlight.
Did you get to speak with him or interview him?
I saw him in Hollenbeck. I didn't because I was, again, the detectives were the ones. I wasn't a senior detective at the time. But I do remember, and again, this is a story. George Thomas, one of the guys on the task force with me, when they captured Ramirez, they had to sit with him in the interrogation room while the detectives weren't in there. I remember George Thomas came out and he goes, "Bobby, you know how when you're at a crime scene or a murder scene, and you know how the dead body gives off a certain kind of scent? Not decomposition, that's totally different." And by the way, he nailed that about decomposition body. No, seriously, because when you go into a crime scene and the victim has been there 8 days before, and the reason they found it was because of the smell. I mean, it's a very distinct smell. Well, detectives, usually, some guys can handle it, others put Vicks in their nose. I don't know where he got that, but I do that. I did that, I should say. So, did that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, it was, did some of the other ones interview him, you said?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So George Thomas said about the smell, he goes, you know how the dead body, when you're in a crime scene, you know how they give off kind of a certain odor? I said, hey, that's how Ramirez, he had that same smell. Okay.
There was something about him throwing up after he was caught or something. Some detail about him throwing up and it was all green. I don't know if that's gross,
I
but
don't remember. I just know they really put the boots to it.
Alice.
I'm
Oh, sorry.
just intrigued about the association of the Santa Ana winds and the rise in crime. I mean, I know you're not a psychologist, but from your knowledge, what can you tell us about that? Where's this cause and effect? I mean, I'm just...
Yeah, I'm not an expert, God knows it would be more like a meteorologist that can tell you about this, but there's something about ions coming.
Right.
The wind causes ions to blow and it just affects people, and I'm telling you, people are crazy. People, in fact, he writes it very good. I can't give it to you per se, but he nails it. But the other one that nails it is Raymond Chandler, very famous. Just look up on your
Wikipedia, on Google search, look up Raymond Chandler Desert Winds. And you'll get the impression, I don't know why, but they just go.
Yeah, that's what about too. Like,
Somebody has the propensity already, so those ions can kind of trigger.
Oh, yeah, remember what I told you about that latent quirk that people have?
Oh, yeah.
Santa Ana's blowing, there it is, coming out. George Butler, retired Philadelphia police detective.
I was just thinking, full moon, same thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right, George.
Well, did you ever,
Thank you.
you had a positive photo ID, you had a
Yeah.
fingerprint ID. Does he ever confess throughout all this?
You know, George, I don't know, I can't answer that. They had him dead to rights. But I will tell you this, so they did a live, what's called a live lineup at the county sheriff. And so what they have, they get 5 prisoners along with the suspect. And they put them in a lineup, you know, and you've seen it on TV where they walk them out and they sort of stand forward, okay, turn to the side, turn to the back, turn this way. And they had the surviving victims, some people actually survived, and any other witnesses. And it's in like in an auditorium. It's really spooky for them because they're up there live. Now there's a total glass, but even then, it's really difficult for, you know, victims and witnesses. It's like in a movie theater, and yet there's the guy right in front of them. So, but I remember seeing, I wasn't there at the live lineup, but I saw the photographs of it, and I went, man, I know what Ramirez looks like, and this is about as good a lineup as they could put together. I mean, there were people, they all looked the same. You know, they had the heights and everything, and it would have been difficult, I would have thought, for some of the witnesses and victims to pick them out. But they got him in a live lineup. But I don't know, George, to answer your question, I don't know if, I don't think he ever gave it up. I think he waived his.
Wikipedia gave you all that, a lot of the stuff that you and Alan.
Yeah, I don't
The
think,
eyeball,
yeah.
the Diane Feinstein.
Yeah.
The sneakers that
I thought he said
never
something.
confessed to that.
I thought he said something when the television cameras were in the courtroom. He said, "Yeah, I killed them all." I think he said that
Well, I
once,
remember
but you know.
that was another thing. During the trial, suddenly he jumps up and he holds his hand up and he drew a pentagram. He said, "Hail Satan."
I think maybe like 2 more questions, maybe. They're working on it, somebody.
The way that you describe the arbitrary and therefore sort of widespread fear, you know, that resulted from this, the arbitrary spacing and all that, reminds me of some other way that Bugliosi talks about the Manson murders.
Yes.
And the you know, seeming randomness and the sense of utter panic in LA County. And so I'm wondering if there was anyone left over from that case who was still around, or how you would, you know, compare it to that.
I wasn't out in LA at the time, but I remember reading about it. I think what it was is he didn't do nearly as many.
Yeah.
And they didn't do them with the Santa Anas. But it was similar, but you gotta remember now, so LA was in turmoil because of the Mansons. But suddenly, you go from LA to San Francisco, halfway down to San Diego, you really got the whole state. So nobody felt safe.
Ellie.
I just wondered, in the end, I mean, it seemed, you mentioned multiple times how random it seemed, if there was ever any sense of what did motivate Ramirez's choices of where he,
No,
was it truly opportunistic, or?
No, you know, the funny thing, that's a great question, because there were a number of the residents that he hit, I can't remember how many, there were more than a few, happened to be yellow. So that was one of the things that the detectives were keen in on, is yellow houses. And I don't know, maybe he did talk a little bit, but it had nothing to do with him doing it. He just picked them at random. Yeah.
Was there something about his brother who had killed somebody in front of him when he was younger? That
Yeah,
I think, but I mean,
I didn't get into that end. You can look that up on Wikipedia. It'll give some background on it. I mean, he was a very, how would you call it? He had some difficult situations growing up as a youth, which, you know, doesn't still
right.
give a reason for why he did it.
Okay, one more question, then I think we'll be around afterwards for a while again.
I was wondering earlier, did he ever plead insanity as opposed, and not be able then to get the death sentence or whatever because of him being insane.
Yeah,
Was he just a
everybody hear
bad
that question,
seed?
did he plead insanity? I don't, you know, it escapes me. I don't think that's a difficult defense. Very few people want to go that way as defense attorneys, because I'm a private investigator and have been since I retired. And some of the cases I do are criminal defense for ethical attorneys. You get a kick out of that. I know that they shy away from ever trying in a murder case to go criminal defense. It's very difficult.
But do you think he was insane?
No, I don't think he was insane. I think he was possessed. There's a difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just want to get your opinion on the hysteria rapist and the hysteria rapist and the arrest.
The Golden State Killer, right? Yeah, Golden State Killer, yeah. It's got like 20 names.
Okay, I was talking to some of the other detectives. Here's what they haven't come out why. There's a reason that they initially honed in on this guy after all these years. So then they said it developed over 6 days very quickly, and they mentioned surveillance. They said, what I think happened, somehow they got information that this is the guy. I think the reason they followed him for 6 days was to get a good DNA sample. For example, the guy goes to Starbucks. He drinks his Starbucks coffee and then he throws it in the garbage. So what happens is, like SIS would do this with us, they'd be in there, you know, dressed up as regular people, and when he got up and he'd throw that thing and go out, one of the detectives would have gloves on, scoop that up because you don't want to contaminate it with prints or anything like that, put it in a sealed evidence bag and then take it to the lab. That's what I think happened to make the DNA thing. I'm really interested to find out what was the clue that initially turned them on to that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, as a detective, like, how would you feel as a detective who finally put that to bed? You know, like that.
Oh, God.
Right.
It's like, yes, my God. but you know, that's like, wow, great. But when I told you how I worked in 77th, where we had 25, 30 murders, we never had a chance to celebrate. Because, oh, here, you got that one, you're on call for tonight, here's 2 more. We'd have the weekend on call, and sometimes you get 2 or 3 murders. So we never celebrate. We never had a chance to. We just piled it on. So. But yeah, you're really excited when you put somebody down like that. That's a big deal.
I'd say having one an amazing thing to catch him after all those years. Just as a side note, apparently his last known killing in '86 happened in my hometown in Irvine, which is Rancho Santolino again, and killed a 19-year-old woman, Janelle Cruz, who went to my high school. She had just graduated, and I went to school with her sister, Michelle Cruz. I'm on Facebook with her, and she was a part of this group of victims that really worked hard over the last 25, 30 years to make sure that the case was kept in media and didn't go cold. So she's all over Facebook today, just ecstatic that they think they've caught him. So I mean, another part of the reason why for this sort of idea of writing about the Night Stalker resonated me with this Irvine, that nothing bad could happen, but then yet it did, like anywhere else. So.
Read his book.
Thanks, Bob.
I'm not because, like I said, you'll really understand how a real detective thinks. And how he did it, he just told you, but he nails it, and it's a really good story.
We got, I guess, one more question, and then we're
One more question. Of all the cases that you had over the years of being a homicide detective, was this one of the more high-profile cases? Or did you have other ones similar or worse?
Yeah, I mean, nothing that you would necessarily read about. This was the most quote-unquote most high profile. Some of the cases that I had in 77th were the most difficult because you put in so much time, so many hours, and just trying to find a witness, that would come forward. There was a lot of criminal element that you're dealing with, and so find them and to get them. A lot of times you make a case down there by using an informant. And they're really, really difficult. And then, you know, then you have to protect the witnesses, you have to protect your informant. It was a very, very difficult job, and witnesses were murdered. It happened, you know, it's hard to live with. You do the best you can, but it was just a real difficult situation, and you did the best you can.
Well, I thank you again for coming out here. I really appreciate it.